man! Hello, world! What is up? Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Matt Forte. We are here live at the Build Studios in New York City, and I'm super excited. Our next guest is huge. I just met him. My God, he's amazing. He's a tower of a man. Also, let me read my copy here. He's also an actor, a professional wrestler, a former bare-knuckle boxer, and is currently a commentator and executive with World of Sport Wrestling on ITV. Starting tomorrow, you can catch him starring as John Gold in the heart-pounding action thriller I Am Vengeance. Ladies and gentlemen, the great Stu Bennett is here. How about that, huh? How we feel about Stu? Yeah? Oh, man. He's the real deal. I'm super excited he's here. We're going to get him out on stage in just a second, but before we do, I believe we have the trailer. We're going to take a look at that. So let's go ahead and run that clip.
John Gold. Military cross. He was a one-man war machine. He all but disappeared just over 3 years ago, and he's been completely off-grid ever since.
Oh, would you look at that? A real-life ghost.
Two days ago, my friend, Sergeant Daniel Mason, was killed. I'm here to find whoever did it.
We were wondering what you're doing up here.
Devotion is a broken place. People around here, they're scared.
You better stop shooting your mouth off, pal. You're a dead man.
Come on! Let's dance. Really?
I know you want justice for the Mason family, but you might want to think about leaving town.
It's not justice I'm after.
Let him come.
But I'm not leaving town until I find out what happened to Dan Mason. Or I'm gonna decorate this place in a delicate shade of your skull and brain.
What's this prick look like then? Just shoot any prick you don't recognize so we can piss off down the pub.
First round's on me, lads.
Oh, it's perfect. Guys, make some noise. Stu Bennett!
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Man, Stu, congratulations on this film, man. It is so much fun, and it really kicks ass. You're amazing in it, dude. This is wonderful.
Thank you very much. It's very kind of you. You can keep going for 30 minutes if you want. I'll never get tired of that.
You're just going to sit here. I'm going to tell you how great this was for another 20 minutes. I hope you're ready for it. Seriously, thank you so much for coming and hanging out with us, man. We're stoked that you're here. Before we get into the film, the process, the whole nine, comparing it, we're going to do the whole thing. But before we do any of that, I love, because I have so much time here, finding out, how the hell are you? How's Stu doing, man? How are you holding up?
I'm great. You know what? This is my first big media session for the movie. It's a staggered release around the world, and the US release is first. And I feel very fortunate that I live about 40 blocks from here, so this is about as easy as it gets. And then it's going to get a lot more difficult from here, and I've got to go and travel and stuff like that. But this one's great, and it's amazing to be here today with you.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, you're in the early stage. I think it's like day 2 or 3 of the whole press experience. But I imagine, though, like you, dude, you were a fighter, a wrestler for a while. You're accustomed to traveling, being down the road, and those are long, exhausting hours. This is small potatoes, man. You're showing up.
This is amazing. You know what? I got up
it.
today at about 9:30. A car picked me up. I did about an hour and a half of work. They took me back home for my lunch, and then they pick me up again, bring me down for a couple of hours, and I go back again, and I do something else tonight. It's like,
oh, man.
I've got it made. I finally figured it out. Just put everything in New York now, and I'm good. No more travel.
The lunch at home is clutch, because that's not going to happen all the time.
Absolutely. I mean, something real easy, chicken and rice, and I'm good to go. You know.
Is that how this happens, chicken and rice?
That's it, yeah. There's, well, I mean,
that's where I veered, all right? That's what I did wrong. Jeez. God bless you, man. Tonight you're doing, so tomorrow's the big release, select cities, and of course VOD, but I think there's a screening going on tonight. Is that right? A special screening tonight?
Yeah, that's right. We're working with Collider Video.
Yeah,
They're doing
right,
a screening in Times Square. So pretty excited for that. So I'm going to do a little Q&A afterwards on that too. And it's always great to see people's reactions to the film and listen to how they react to each scene and stuff like that.
Have you gotten to do
exciting.
a bit of that yet? Is this like see it on a big screen with an audience and watch them react and all that
Yeah,
stuff?
we actually had something at a film festival last year. We had a screening of the movie then. It was an early cut of the movie. It subsequently had a few tweaks and changes since then. So I haven't actually seen the very final version, which is going to be at the screening tonight. So that's the first time I've seen the final version. But we've had a little reaction from here and there. And obviously, we've had the movie go out to a few interviewers, a few reviewers and stuff like that, and got feedback from them, which has been great. So yeah, excited to actually see what people think of the movie tonight.
That's cool, man. What's that experience like for you? I mean, you've done so many crazy things and performed in so many ways, but now here you are watching your image. Like, is this weird for you? You're the guy right now. Not a lot of people get to be the guy. You got to be the guy. How are you doing with that experience?
You know what? I'm going to assume some people in the room at least are familiar with what I've done in the past, which my background, for those who don't know, is professional wrestling. That's kind of where I started out. And I've done a couple of movies prior to this too, but for my entire career in the professional wrestling game and prior to this acting too, I've been a career bad guy. I was always the bad guy, and I think it's almost a rule that if you have an English accent and you come to the US, in entertainment, you're going to be the bad guy. So I was fine with that. I love being the bad guy, but this was really the first opportunity for me to play the good guy or the big hero, which is weird for me. But it's a lot of fun. And what I liked about the character was the fact that he's playing the good guy, but it's a very gritty, dark film where he's essentially coming to seek vengeance upon the perpetrators of the murder of his best friend. So even though I'm the good guy, I'm certainly not the smiley, high-fiving, baby-kissing guy that I will never play because I can't pull that off.
There's no desire to ease into that, to like become that guy.
Yeah, I just don't think I have it in me.
Well, it's so funny, man. It's like such a testament to your acting ability. I've known you for a total of, 8 minutes, and I was like, man, he's a hell of an actor because you are so nice and so jovial. And it's like, it's true. We, as a fan, we only know you as a heel, as a bad guy, as what you've been casted as. And so here you are. You're the good guy. This is your first time becoming the good guy and portraying that. You know, let's get into it a little bit. How do you prepare for that? You know this is going to be your first good dude. What are you doing to get into that zone and play this character that you haven't had a chance to play before at this scale?
Yeah, definitely tap into some previous emotions and situations where I've utilized the emotions that this character goes on throughout the movie. There is an arc of emotions through the film of the initially coming in as a regular guy and discovering the murder of his best friend and subsequently building up the anger and kind of doing a bit of detective work to find out who the killers were and you know, ultimately exploding in rage upon them. And hopefully, I think at the end, gaining some redemption. We'll see how things end up in there. But, you know, it's a character arc and really drawing from past emotions and working with some acting coaches and stuff like that on bringing that out of me.
Had you ever done any of that stuff like that before? Because you do a lot of acting and wrestling as well, and you're playing characters, you know, all the time. Did you ever feel the need to bring a coach into it, or was this because you're kind of stepping slightly outside of your comfort zone? You were like, let me bring in some extra hands and see what I can learn.
Yeah, sure. I think what a lot of people don't realize about professional wrestling, if they're not familiar with it, it's very different to boxing or UFC and things like that, in that it's not really a sport. I hate to break it to anyone who wasn't aware of that. But it's not really a sport, it's entertainment. And what you're doing the whole time in professional wrestling is you're playing characters and you're telling stories. So the guy you saw in the ring wrestling was never really me. I was playing a character of a bad guy, or, you know, if it was a phony king or a bare knuckle fighter or a guy who gives out bad news or whatever I did through my career, I was constantly tweaking characters.
I love the idea of the fan that just had their heart broken to find out you weren't a real king. Like, wait a second. The whole thing's a lie.
Get William out of the Buckingham Palace. It's my spot.
That's fantastic. But yeah, so that's the reality of it though, is that you've had to do that. So now you've come into this. You're expanding on that skill set. You're bringing some of that with you, and you're coming into this world. So you leverage these other people, these acting coaches and things of that nature, right? Is that
for sure. So I'd worked with a couple of acting coaches prior to this movie. I did a movie in 2012 called Dead Man Down with Colin Farrell and Terrence Howard that I had a pretty small role in. It was kind of my first footsteps in the film world, and then I did a film in 2015 called Eliminators with a guy called Scott Adkins, who's a pretty big name, kind of martial arts type actor from the UK, and I did a couple of good fight scenes with him in that. So that was really getting my feet wet and moving towards this direction, which I'm heading in at the moment. And along the way, building up a skill set in the acting world and how to transition from acting in front of arenas with 20,000 plus people in them and cameras in the wrestling world and transitioning that into working on a very small, tight camera in a very silent room and not having that crowd reaction and stuff. So that's a huge transition.
Yeah, that's got to be one of the more challenging parts, is that your body, you've done so many shows, hundreds of thousands of people, and now here you are, you got a crew of maybe, I don't know, 20, I'm just shooting a number out there in the room, and you've got these cameras. Was that a difficult thing to kind of recalibrate and like dial everything back? Because you're scratching certain itches and touching into certain muscle memory that you have, but you've got to just pull it all back.
Yeah, so in professional wrestling, you're basically your entire day, you're sitting at the arena, you're kind of waiting for your little 10 or 15-minute slot on the show where you go out and there's this explosion of noise and, pyrotechnics, and you get this crazy adrenaline rush because you're out there performing in front of a live audience and there's millions of people watching live on TV around the world. It's a huge audience. So you have this insane sudden adrenaline burst, whereas in the acting world, you kind of have a 12-hour plus day of filming, but there's no sudden adrenaline, but you've got to maintain an adrenaline level throughout the day. So it's definitely in terms of hitting those moments and getting the performance out, it's definitely quite the tweak. And there's huge tweaks too in terms of the professional wrestling is simulated fighting, which you would think would lend itself well to simulated fighting in an action movie, which there's a ton of in this. But the actual style of fighting is completely different, where in professional wrestling, it's very much improv and just going with the flow.
You kind of sketch out the idea of a match beforehand. You'll talk. Sometimes you don't, but most of the time you'll talk to your opponent beforehand.
You'll usually get maybe 5% of the match you'll actually plan out and choreograph. Maybe the finish, maybe the start, and a couple of moves here and there. But for 95% of the time in a professional wrestling match, you're kind of talking to each other without moving your lips as much as you can, and we have a language of speaking with our bodies that he can tell what I'm about to do and stuff. And you're just reacting to how the crowd are responding and stuff.
That energy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Whereas in screen fighting, it's very much planned out and it's very specific and precise and exact because you've got one camera and you've got one set of lighting that you don't want to block, and the guy you're fighting with needs to know exactly what moves are coming in what order and where your feet are going to be, because he's then going to swing and jump at one point, and everything is almost like a dance. So whereas my natural instincts when I first got on set doing screen fighting were kind of improv and going with the flow, because that's what I'd done, 250 plus matches a year for the last 12 or something years. For me, that was one of the hardest things, to kind of rein that in and be a lot more exact and precise whilst still making it look like a fight as opposed to a dance.
How many close calls? How many times did you... Oh, sorry.
It depends what your definition of close is. If close is actually punching someone in the mouth legit, then there was a number of those, unfortunately, on both sides, and it was always my fault, I've got to say. I was working with Gary Daniels in this film, who is an absolute legend of screen fighting, and he knows what he's doing. He doesn't make mistakes, and he's in there with me, and I make a lot of mistakes. So, and sometimes, to be fair, I would make the mistake where I would put my head somewhere where his boot is going, and I would get kicked as a result. So sometimes he was on the receiving end of my mistakes. Sometimes I'd get it back in that way.
How was he? And he was cool about that. He understood that you're kind of figuring. Like, did he get the transition you were trying to make and kind of help you with that? And or is it just this understanding of do you still apologize? You go, all right, my bad. Let's keep going. That was on me. Like, how does that dynamic work?
Gary is an absolute gentleman. I think he was very understanding of my transition, because a lot of people might not know, he is a former kickboxing world champion. He is a legitimate badass, really. You know, this guy is an absolute killer in there, and he had to transition at one point from going from that to doing it himself. So he knows where I'm coming from. He knows I'm not coming in there to do a number on Gary Daniels so I can tweet about it afterwards or something like that. He understands it completely, and we had a great relationship, and he was very giving to me in terms of where I wanted to take the fight and my ideas. And he always had great suggestions of his own, and he had a ton of advice for me and tweaks and stuff like that. And he was an absolute pleasure to work with. So,
were a lot of the stunt guys, is that a similar story for a lot of the guys on set of like a professional fighter in some capacity, and then it just got to a point was like, oh, I can make a lot more money and die a lot less if I just do this in front of a camera? Like, is that a similar thing that you heard, that it was guys that had that experience, the real world fighting experience?
I think that always lends itself well because there's a certain movement that you get from real life fighting that it's hard to replicate unless you've actually done something like that before. Some guys are better than others, but I think if you've come from a kind of a fighting background or a pseudo fighting background, you know how bodies move in fights and how you would react to punches and things like that. And you learn, we call it selling, how to sell a punch and how my body would react if I really had been punched. Even though this guy is throwing a punch at me, which to the camera looks like he's punching my teeth out and really he's missing me by a couple of inches, I need to know how my body would react if he really did punch me in order to make that look good on camera. So, yeah, there's a certain element of the only way you can act this is if you've actually been punched in the mouth a few times, unfortunately. So I'm sure you can tell by the shape of my nose I've been punched a few times. So there we go. I earned that.
Well, I got so many questions, not specifically about your nose. I have questions about your, like, I watched a lot of fighting movies growing up. I never had the stones to go out and actually do it, obviously, right? So, one, let's just go back a little bit. When did you decide to go down this path, man? What got you into this world of being a professional fighter and doing this? Because it calls into question, like, what are you afraid of? Do you have fear? Because it would appear as though from the outside you do not. Like, what was the beginning like, to give us a brief window into that moment in time where you're like, I could do this?
You know, the truth is I grew up the biggest wrestling nerd on the planet. I discovered American professional wrestling when I was about 9 years old, and that was the rise of Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior and Bret the Hitman Hart and all these guys, which I fell in love with it immediately. And there was something in my brain as a kid that I didn't actually associate those figures that I was seeing on my TV as real people. And then when I got a little bit older, like I said, I was the biggest nerd. I'd watch everything and I'd see their characters, and we didn't really have social media like we have now. So you never got to see the real life person. You just saw what
it was so much easier to get caught up in it back
Sure,
then,
sure,
man.
absolutely.
I was a huge fan as a kid,
and
too.
to me, they were just comic book characters. They were almost like watching cartoons. And then around about 18 or 19 years old, when I was in university, I read a book by a guy called Mick Foley, who wrestled as Mankind. Big, huge star, and yeah, exactly. That was the book. So, and that was the first book I read that actually humanized a genuine star in the world of professional wrestling. He talked about his upbringing, how he was in college, and how he didn't know what to do with his life, and he had this epiphany where he was going to become a pro wrestler and do crazy stuff in the ring. And I was like, wow, that's kind of exactly where I'm at in life right now. I'm studying for this degree, and I'm not sure I want to continue after I get my degree in that world, and I feel like that I'm athletic, I'm big, I love professional wrestling, why don't I give it a go? And immediately the next day finished the book and went down the gym, started pumping iron, and started on this course of trying to find out how I become a professional wrestler, which was where it all began for me.
I would watch it and I'd be amazed, and I thought a lot of the same things, but I think what just differed for us is I'd look at like Bobby the Brain, I'd be like, oh, I could do that. I could yell from the side while the big strong guy goes fighting.
You know what? That guy was the smartest guy ever, because he never, well, he did get beat up occasionally, but for 99% of his career, he just yelled and screamed and talked, whereas I'm the guy who's out there getting kicked in the face and dropped on my head and having surgeries for snapped arms and stuff. It's like, why didn't I figure the talking part out a little earlier, you know?
You figured it out now. Here you are.
Exactly, you know, and that's maybe I got a little older and a little smarter, and maybe that's the direction to go in now.
So cool, man. I'm getting this signal. We got a bunch of questions in the room that I want to make sure we take all of those. But before we do it, I'll just remind everybody: select cities tomorrow, Friday the 24th. Also on VOD, is that right? So if you don't want to go to the theater, you can watch it at home. I say get a bunch of people go to a theater, man. This is one of those movies that people are going to be hooting and hollering at during the fights and stuff. It's a lot of fun to watch. and you got to go out and see it for sure.
Yeah, that's right. It's a limited theatrical release out in the US. It's in about 10 major markets, including New York, where we're at now, and LA, and Dallas, and a bunch of other Chicago, big cities out there. So if you like cinemas, which I do, definitely go out and check it there. But yeah, it's available VOD. If you're feeling lazy and you want to sit on the couch and download it, that's also an option too. And you can check out, I'm on my Twitter, which is @Stu Bennett. I'll have all the links on there with where you can go find it and where you can download it from and stuff like that. So check me out on there, and that'll have a bunch of details on too.
Perfect. Congrats again, man. All right, let's do it. We got microphones in the room. First fan question right here.
Hi, Stu. My name is John. Big wrestling fan. Big fan of the Wade Barrett character. When you were the leader of the Nexus, you're in that leadership role. When you transition into Bad News Barrett, the little comedic side. What has been some of the difficulties transitioning from wrestling to the acting world? Was there like a stunt scene that was, it was hard to pick up, or delivering certain type of lines? What type of difficulties?
I think the biggest difficulty in transitioning from professional wrestling to the acting world generally is toning down your performance. So in the pro wrestling world, everything is massively over the top, and every reaction that you do in the ring is kind of corny, if we're honest. It's not supposed to be serious. It's a comic book world. So one of the things they used to say when I was beginning in wrestling was that you need to do huge emotions. Every time you react in any way, if you're happy, if you're sad, if you're angry, make it 100 times bigger than it would be normally, because the guy in the very back row in these giant arenas in row Z or whatever it is, he needs to see that reaction. So you do everything huge and over the top. So one of the hardest things really was transitioning to bringing everything a lot further down for the screen roles. When you've got a camera right in your face, it picks up every little crease in your face and then every slight hint of emotion and stuff like that. So bringing that down was definitely important. And for me personally, one of the things I did when I was getting ready for this role, I studied some of the older action stars like Charles Bronson and Clint Eastwood, because I felt they played their roles very stoically and very reserved versus the kind of action roles you see these days. I think it's a lot more over the top, which is great. But I felt for me personally, I needed to study guys that had very, very small emotions and that kind of thing. So Charles Bronson and Clint Eastwood and those guys I thought were perfect at it. So I studied those and tried to steal what I could from them. There you go.
That's great.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to seeing the movie.
Thanks.
Did you find, I know you're not, you say never, but I know you're not like rushing to jump back in the ring anytime soon right now, but you're doing work over on ITV with WS Wrestling and all that, and that's going really well, and you're commentating over there, and you're executive over there. Did you find yourself bringing anything you learned on this back with you to the wrestling world, maybe to impart to the guys that are in the ring, or just into the ways that you approach the job that you do there? Did you find it going the other direction at all?
I think because of the fact that I'm playing an executive role on WOS Wrestling, I think I've tried to play it very almost stoically, similar to how I play John Gold, as opposed to the over-the-top stuff. I'm supposed to be the controlling influence of the WOS show, so certainly bringing that in to my character rather than the crazy over-the-top stuff that people might have seen in the past with Bad News Barrett and King Barrett and all the ridiculous stuff that I've done over the years. So that's certainly part of it. And the other thing is, I always advise the young wrestlers coming through who are coming through on the WOS show. They're kind of where I was at 10 years ago. And I always tell them, like, every opportunity you get to do a scene, to be involved in things outside of wrestling, take those opportunities, because wrestling isn't going to last forever. For me, I kind of got burned out by the time I was 36, and it doesn't mean I now never want to be involved in wrestling, but I knew I needed to arc off into another field, which is why I'm kind of focusing on acting and TV hosting and stuff at the moment. But any opportunity you get to be in a movie or anything like that, take it, because those opportunities will open doors for you further down the road, whereas you might not want them now. One day you might well need them, and look at doing that.
You just mentioned hosting. I forgot you're doing Beastmaster too, man. You're friggin' everywhere. How are you?
Yeah, it's pretty funny, because professional wrestling, things happen that you go out and you're in the ring and it's live on TV as a live audience. You immediately get feedback on what's happening because they're booing or they're cheering or whatever they're doing, and you come to the back and that's your job done for the day, and okay, let's go back and do it again tomorrow. In the acting world and the TV hosting world, we actually filmed this 2 years ago. So this has been a long way of editing and checking it out to a test audience and bringing it back, re-editing, packaging it, selling it around the world to distribution companies, and then finally getting it out, which has taken 2 years. Beastmaster was another one, which I'm a TV host of a new Netflix show, which is coming out next Friday. It's kind of like American Ninja Warrior. It's the Netflix version of that, and I'm hosting and commentating on that. That was filmed a year ago. So yeah, it's taking a bit of getting used to not have that immediate response and just having to wait. Get this in the can, and they're going to edit it and bring it out later. So stuff is coming out now and slowly but surely dripping out there, and I guess that's the way this world works now.
That's pretty amazing, man. All right, we got a few more. Next one's going to be right over, I think, back here. Yeah, go for it. You got a mic.
All right. How you doing, by the way, man?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for coming out.
Hey, Ty, man. I'm glad I was given this opportunity to process, to like not only see you right now, but to like first see you like make yourself appear as, you know, Wade Barrett, then Bad News Barrett, and so forth and so forth, even going on to your movie career now. And in relation to your wrestling gig, right, I was actually wondering if you could like refer me to Vince McMahon, right? See if I could like be signed on to maybe NXT or Raw or SmackDown, whichever, you know, would come first for me.
I think when I left WWE, Vince blocked my phone number. He never wants me calling him again. So I don't know if he's going to answer my call, but what I would suggest if you're interested in pro wrestling is doing what I did, is finding yourself a good school. I take it you're not actually in a wrestling school at the moment? No, yeah. I mean, the best bet is finding a good wrestling school who are going to teach you the ways to do it properly. And there's a whole kind of production line of wrestlers who are kind of climbing that ladder. And I mean, even to get to NXT now, which is the bottom rung of the WWE ladder, you have to be really good just to get there. They generally don't take guys who can't wrestle. You have to have, you know, been out there on the wrestling circuit for a number of years, perfecting your skills and have something to offer them. And then they'll say, okay, you're now one of the best wrestlers in the world. Now you come to our bottom rung of the ladder and start working your way up from there. So
from the books I've read in the past, like in terms of every career, you got to pay your dues, put in your time. But I feel like wrestling, I've read more so than any other career, man. You got to put in your time. You got to get out there, do the hours, pay your dues, show that you want it more than anything, and it's rewarded for the most part if you stick it out and you do it. But like, you got to really work and put in the hours before you get on TV or something like that.
It's like, to have success in the wrestling industry, like a lot of industries, you have to crawl on your hands and your knees over broken glass for years and years just to get that opportunity. And the only way you can do that is by having a tremendous passion for it. And probably from the age of about 9 till, 30 plus, in my early 30s, the only thing that mattered to me in life was professional wrestling, and I had this drive and this desire to get there. And you could have made me crisscross the country for months and not paid me a penny, and I would have done it just for my opportunity to shake the hand of the guy who might one day say you're hired. And that was my mentality at the time, and that's how I needed to be at that time to get to where I wanted to get. So there's no easy way in there, unfortunately, and that's why it's such a rewarding industry if you do have success in there. But it's like it's like hosting or acting or whatever else people do in this room. To get to the top of your respective industries, you need to have a passion. You need to work hard. That's the only way to do it.
Yeah, but that's a great bit of advice and a great place to start is find a wrestling school, man, and get into it for real. Thank you for that question, man. All right, we got a few more. Next one's coming from right over here.
How you doing, Mr. Bennett? My name is Alejandro.
Thank you.
I followed your career from NXT. And I was wondering, wrestling, did it prepare you for acting since it's so similar to the Miser method?
Yeah. So, I mean, wrestling for me has always been about the characters. The athletic part of wrestling is very important. It was always secondary to the storylines and the characters. The athleticism for me was just a means of telling a story. The important part was always the characters and the story. So the fact that I always tried to focus my career on getting the right character or perfecting a persona and telling a story to the crowd was what certainly prepared me into getting into roles in acting and that kind of thing. Are you acting yourself?
I had little spare roles. One film, The House That Jack Built, on Netflix.
Good for you. Getting that plug in real quick.
Watch
really
Ultimate
do it, but it's on Netflix
Beastmaster
right
and
now.
then
You
watch
could-
The House That Jack Built. Do it in that order. Smart guy. This guy's going to go far. There we go.
That was awesome. We got one more. Do the plug at the top, man. Just get it out of the way if you're.
How you doing, Stu Bennett?
Good.
Mr. Bennett. My question is, can you try to give me some information on what happened to your last run in WWE and if you're gonna return?
Yeah, so my last run in WWE, I was portrayed as the King of the Ring. I won a tournament called the King of the Ring tournament, and I became the King of Wrestling, which I was hoping at the time when it initially happened that it was going to springboard me onto bigger and better things in WWE. I felt that the direction the character took was a little bit hokey. I was asked to wear kind of a plastic crown and a ridiculous outfit and stuff like that, which if you go back to the 80s worked great. There was some great King of the Rings back then, like Haku and Harley Race and all these legends of wrestling, and that worked for them. I felt that in 2016, I think it was, that I was doing that character. I thought it was a little hokey, and I wasn't being allowed to have the kind of creative latitude with the character to do what I wanted to do and do the things that I felt that an audience would enjoy as the King of Wrestling. So that was one of the reasons that I kind of soured on my job, and my contract came up to an end in around about April 2016, and I decided not to extend it at that point and move on into new ventures like I Am Vengeance. So yeah, it was a kind of a sad run for me because it was the end of what had been a lot of fun, but I knew for me it was time to move on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your question.
Thank you, man, and thank you everybody for being a great audience and asking great questions and plugging your own projects and hanging out with us. And I really do appreciate you guys being here, and I sincerely appreciate you being here and hanging out with us, Stu. You are awesome and an absolute gentleman, and so cool and so funny and so the opposite of the characters we've come to know and love. So I'm really excited for you, man, and excited for this film, which is coming out select cities tomorrow. I Am Vengeance is out there and on VOD as well. So plenty of reasons and ways to see it. So go watch it, please. Get some friends together, watch this film, and enjoy it. And before you do that, everyone here and all over the world, make some noise and join me in thanking properly the great Stu Bennett. Please.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming out. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, too.